Hello YouTube, it is me again back with another video, and this one is one that I have been promising for way too long. I know that I need to hurry up and get on the character introductions and world introductions and so on. I have just had so little time. I've been doing a college math class, and it was an accelerated math class over the summer, and it has just taken up all of my life. Very stressful. I have not enjoyed this math class. I think that it is just unnecessarily stressful, but you know what? We will rebuild. We will overcome this. It will be okay. So for this video, I'm going to be talking about Gilded Discord. So I have actually introduced a couple characters from Gilded Discord on this channel before, but I am going to be using this video as sort of a clean slate. I am going to be redrawing all of those characters and going taking a little bit of a different route for introducing my different characters. And for this first video, I want to take a minute to talk about the history of Gilded Discord as a universe and as a world, to set up the world that these characters live in. And I have about 32 minutes to do that, about 31-ish now. So let's just jump right into it. So, the world of Gilded Discord I don't have a name for the continent. If any of you have ideas for what I could name this continent, let me know in the comment section down below. I'm interested as to what you think might be appropriate. But originally there was no Olden and Raiden. So originally it was just this king who was under the Raiden dynasty, and this king was referred to as the Wild King. And the Wild King I have actually drawn on this channel before as a part of my Inktober drawings. And he was, I believe, for the prompt fat, and it was very appropriate. He's very overweight and gluttonous, and just a tiny lot a bit crazy. He was a tyrant. He worked his people to the point where they were starving and exhausted. People were dropping from all of the work that he was forcing them to do, and then he didn't pay for any sort of medical care for his people whatsoever, so people were just getting sick and dying and being injured and being unable to work, and it was a miserable, miserable time in this world's history. And he had a really fairly long reign because he was just so powerful. Physically, he was one of the largest dragon forms to ever exist. In the modern standards, his dragon form would easily be almost as tall as a skyscraper. He was just huge and daunting. He was the kind of person that you would just look up at this dragon and be like, yeah, I accept that I'm gonna die now. So he was very powerful, and it was very difficult to find anyone willing to stand up to him. His knights were the only people who were in any way well taken care of, so even if they would have wanted to rebel, the chances that any rebellion would succeed were incredibly slim, and then their families would be completely just cut out of work. So most people were so afraid to even try to rebel, but the working class people eventually got to a point where they didn't really have a choice. Either they let their king work them into the grave, or they rebelled. So there were a couple of people that stepped up to the plate. Among them was Nina Wren's parents. Or among them were I can grammar, guys, I promise. So there was Nina Wren's parents, and then at the forefront was Killian Germain and his then... They were courting. I don't know what the word is for that. Is they aren't betrothed yet. Anyway, so it was Alric Wren, Nina's father, and Killian Germain, who were at the very forefront of the revolution, as well as Anira, who would then go on to marry Alric and be Nina and Dyref's mother. So the working class was pretty large in terms of just how many people were poor enough to be considered the working class. There were also slaves and servants and those completely in poverty who joined the cause. So the cause was pretty big. It was a fair amount of the city. And they all decided that they would just riot. And so they did. And many, many people were lost on both sides. It was a huge battle. But ultimately, they were marching towards the palace. And their hope was to lure the king out and then do whatever they had to do to make sure he couldn't hurt anyone else ever again. So they got what they wanted, and the king came out and stepped onto the front steps of his palace and decided, okay, they want to fight me? I will burn them to the ground. So he transformed into his dragon form and just started burning everything in his path. So in Gilded Discord, dragons have a variety of abilities. Not all dragons shoot fire. There are dragons who control electricity. There are dragons who control wind. For the most part, they're just based in different elements, and fire is one of them. So what dragons could control water and ice were doing what they could to protect the young children and to put out as many fires as they could. But with a dragon as massive as the Wild King, they could only put out so much before they were bathed in fire again. The rebellion was really down in numbers, and they all started to realize that this was a losing battle if they couldn't figure out how to stop the king. They could take any remaining knights that were willing to fight them if they could just get rid of the king. So they stopped fighting the knights altogether and huddled in, and they just decided, we will let ourselves be surrounded so long as we can stop the king. And several knights had defected. In the middle of this battle, they realized their families weren't safe no matter what. So several knights had defected and had joined the ranks. So Killian and Alric decide that what they are going to do is they are going to gather the strongest warriors that the people have to offer. The people who are the strongest and the fastest, and the people who are as deadly as they can possibly be. The largest and the quickest, and anyone who could stand a chance in a fight, they were going to go. And they were going to barrage the king. And they were going to take him down using teamwork and by staying in his blind spots. So they all gather around, and that's when Anira, who can't use her dragon form nearly to the extent that most people can, because, well, that's complicated, but to make a long story short, Anira has a disorder that makes her dragon form incredibly weak. So she decides to supply them with potions and alchemic formulas that they can use to temporarily strengthen their dragon forms. But she only has enough for a couple of people. So 3 people take it. One of the defector knights, Alric, and Killian. So these 3 are the leaders of the charge. They make it to the king, and the defector knight makes the mistake of running the king head-on, and the king just puffs him out. So Killian and Alric unfortunately have to use the distraction, and they just start to go, and they fight in the king's weak spots and blind spots, and once the king is overwhelmed, even his massive size can't help him. He tries to unfurl his wings, but he's so heavy and large that he can't fly very well. So they're basically just having to make sure that he stays grounded. And they damaged his wings, they damaged his legs, and they immobilized him until finally, with enough perseverance, almost exhausted, they were finally able to end the reign of the Wild King forever. They all changed back into their human forms and tried to rebuild. At first, there was no real clear plan on who was going to take up the government, but the people soon nominated either Alric or Killian. Alric was very set. He did not want to be a king. He didn't want that on his conscience. He wanted to be someone who could be trusted, an advisor, but he didn't want the mantle of king. So Killian took up the mantle of king, and he decided that it was too dangerous to have people train their dragon forms, because anyone whose dragon form was powerful enough could just come and destroy the city the way the Wild King had. So he outlawed all practice of dragon forms. Well, for a city of people who could proudly turn into dragons, that was a pretty huge change, and a lot of people understandably did not take it well. They saw their dragon forms as something to be proud of, as something that made them powerful and unique, and something that had given them the ability to stand up for themselves when their kingdom had taken advantage of them. They didn't see themselves as weapons, they saw it as being able to defend themselves. So when Killian passed this law, they decided they were going to protest. Killian basically said anyone who felt that they needed to use their dragon form and needed to be trained in combat would not live within the capital city, which he changed the name of, and he changed it to Olden, which is a very old ancient word in Gilded Discord's culture that basically means liberty, essentially. So the kingdom at Olden basically decided that anyone who wanted to follow the old ways, the ways of the formerly known Raiden kingdom, would be banished and exiled. And so many of the Raiden people, the people who still believed that their dragon was something to be proud of, fled. And they formed their own tribes and their own groups, and for a while they were content to bicker among themselves, trying to sort out any means of organizing their own power now that the king had completely forsaken them. Alric did not agree with Killian's decision, but he realized that Killian was doing this out of fear, especially now that his new wife, Avadaria, was pregnant, and so too was Anira. So Alric could understand where Killian was coming from, and instead of trying to push on his friend to reverse the law, he tried to help his friend see the light once again, so that they could negotiate with the Raiden people and meet a compromise. This was Alric's first major mission as the right hand of the king, and it was something he took very seriously. Well, fast forward a couple of years, and Alric and his now wife Anira have 2 children, Direft and Nina Wren, and Killian and Avadaria also have 2 children, Adela Dremain and Avignard Dremain. And everything seems to be going pretty well. The 4 kids are fast friends, though admittedly Avignard is a bit shy, and Direft spends a lot of his time with the other knights and any other children he can find his way into the circles of. Everything seems to be wonderful. But unfortunately, Alric's efforts come a day too late. The Raiden people have decided that the king's new law is not only discriminatory but dangerous. If the king is the only one who is allowed to have high-powered dragons around him, the Raiden people see him as a threat. And so they decided to take on their dragon forms once again to destroy another, in their eyes, wicked king. So these dragons sweep in. They come in under the guise of an envoy and instead sprout wings and start to terrorize the kingdom with the hopes of destroying the king's new regime and implanting a new regime of their own that will, in their eyes, be fairer and overall better. But nothing is really getting done. So in this time, the king and Alric and many of the other important political figures are making their attempts to escape to a safe haven in the mountains where the other dragons are not aware of its existence, so that they can hide out a little while and protect the royal children and the royal family while the knights clean up the mess at the castle. It's not perfect, but it's what needs to be done. Well, Alric tries to load his family up into carriages and onto carts, and everything seems to be going well, except Nina has a sort of crisis of conscience and tries to run after her friend. She tries to run after Adela, and Alric kind of realizes that his child is running off without him. So he grabs her and drags her over to the cart, and as a consequence, they are the last cart on their way to this hideout, while the king and his family are being taken to a separate safe haven so that no one can spill the beans if people from the carriages leading off to safe haven are found. I don't know if I explained that very well. I'm sorry if I didn't explain it very well. Tell me in the comments and I'll try and clarify. But, so The Wren family are the last carriage heading out to their sort of safe house in the mountains when the Raiden people target the carriages and end up destroying the mountain pass. They end up pretty much demolishing a side of the mountain and ruining their path. So Alric is forced to use his dragon form to fend off the Raiden soldiers who have come to kill him and his family. And Alric can't save everyone. Many of the people from the other carriages have died, but Alric manages to save himself and his family, but he is badly wounded. So much so that they don't have time to make it all the way back to the kingdom at Ulden to get medical care. So instead, Anira decides that they are all going to dress down, so they take pretty much all of their fancy royal clothes and destroy them, and then they head in to one of the Raiden territories and claim to be lost Raiden refugees who are injured in the battle and in need of help. So, as the war dies down and Ulden ultimately wins out, the royal family is reinstated, Alric and Nira, Direft and Nina are forced to accustom themselves to a new life in the Raiden camps. And that is where a young Nina and Direft end up being raised. Because at this point they are so deeply immersed in this camp that they can't really get out safely to return home at an orderly fashion. They have to build some sort of trust so that the Raiden people don't use their identities against them. And it's very tense for them for a while, but after a short time, they sort of form bonds, and they form something of a familial relation with a lot of the people in this Raiden camp as they come to realize that these are just people. Nina had been raised to believe that so many of the Raiden people were bad. She knew her father didn't think so, but so many people in the rest of the kingdom did. They thought that they were bad. But now that she's living among them, and now that she is one of them, she's torn. So the main crux of the storyline for these characters occurs upwards of, I think, maybe 16 or so years down the line. Nina is in her early 20s, and so is Direft, and so is Adela. And they have finally worked their way up the ranks and are on their way to the Kingdom of Ulden. Now that they are ambassadors themselves, they are heading to the kingdom at Ulden, or of Ulden. It goes both ways. In order to negotiate another year of peace. And it is Alric and Anira's intention to figure out what the political climate of the kingdom at Ulden is, so that they can reveal who they are, now that so many years have passed and that their appearances have changed so radically. So the Wren family all remember being members of this community, and they remember this kingdom in its golden age. But for the most part, the Dremain family has no idea who they are because they believe that their friends were all killed. So they believe them to be dead, so obviously they're not looking for them 2 decades later in the eyes of a stranger. So that's pretty much where the story picks up. I do love this world. I just think it's so fascinating and so much fun. I actually came up with the story of Gilded Discord in a dream, and the dream was a little bit all over the place, but I remember it having this interesting storyline and these interesting characters, and so when I woke up, I sort of wrote down the basic details and trimmed it up and made it into an actual plot and story. So there is an actual fully fledged and fully organized story that goes with all of these characters. There's a plot, there is a resolution, there is definitely a a lot of turmoil that goes on in this story. And I think you'll find with a lot of my original character introductions, my characters are built in stories. There are very few cases where I just have a character for the sake of having a character. Most of the time, my characters are brought on by circumstance or by necessity through a story that I've created. And Gilded Discord came to me in a dream, and now it has these very fun and unique characters. What's really funny is Nina, Alric, Anira, and Direft are actually based on myself, my brother Christian, my father, and my mother. So in terms of appearance, there is a bit of a resemblance to my actual family, because that was who kind of played them, quote-unquote, in the dream. Alric was my father, Anira was my mother, Direft was my brother, just under different names and in a different circumstance. So that was very interesting to me. So the characters have gone through a little bit of a transformation. Nina has green eyes now, her hair is different than mine, and her personality has changed quite a bit. I've also had to change a lot of stuff about the other characters. They're not my family members, and so that they're three-dimensional characters in their own right, away from my own family, so that they can fit into this beautiful world that I have loved creating, and I would love to do a little bit more world building, and maybe, if you guys want to see it, I will try and make an actual map, because I've never made a map for this story, and I think it would be really interesting to kind of play with making a map and figuring out where everything is, and sort of how things look, because I have a very vague general idea of where I want things to be placed. But I think it could be really interesting to do some drawings of like what Ulden looks like, and what the Raiden tribes look like, and just the general geography, and figure out, are there other places, are there other continents, are there other kingdoms? I have no idea, and that could be something that would be really interesting to sort through as I continue to mess with this lovely, strange dragon story. So let me know in the comments down below if that would be something you'd be interested in seeing. That said, I think I'm going to leave you to watch the last maybe 10 or so minutes of this speed paint. I did speed it up as much as I could without making it really difficult to watch, and ultimately the speed that I settled on made it 32 minutes long, and that was the best way to make sure that it all looked cohesive and that you could see everything that happened. I don't remember if I lost any footage from this. I think I did lose a little bit of footage here and there, so I would keep an eye out for that. But ultimately, I think that would be where I would leave off. If you want to hear more about this story and the actual plot line, let me know. I'm going to be going through and introducing all of the characters that I've drawn here, as well as the many others who have yet to be introduced at all. There are a couple that I haven't drawn, mostly because some of them... I have a character named Drager in the story, and he is meant to be this wise old man figure, and I'm really intimidated to draw him because he's got a lot of wrinkles on his face, and I don't know how to draw convincing wrinkles. Anyway, that said, I hope you have a good morning, evening, afternoon, nighttime, time of day, and I will catch you guys in the next video. If you're subscribed, which you should be, but if you aren't, you can always hit that little red subscribe button, and next to it you will find the notification bell, which you should also click because it lets you know when I have uploaded new videos, and it's a lot of fun, and I think that you will like my videos, obviously, because I made them. Alright, I'll stop pestering you with the typical YouTuber rant, but I hope that you liked this video, and I will catch you guys in the next one.